But the Queen ordered silence. The servant spoke anyway. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Westmarch Castle as young Beatrice hurried through the servants' quarters, her arms laden with fresh linens. At 16, she had served in the castle for only 3 months, but already she had learned the most important rule. When Queen Margaret spoke, all others fell silent. The Queen's word was law, her judgment absolute, and those who dared contradict her found themselves in the dungeons, or worse. Beatrice had witnessed this just yesterday, when the Queen's own treasurer, an elderly man named Edmund Thornley, had attempted to question a new tax on the villages. The Queen had raised her hand, her emerald ring catching the light, and spoken those words that chilled every spine in the throne room. "I command silence." Edmund had pressed on, trying to explain that the people were already starving, and within the hour he was dragged to the dungeons. His family's assets were seized by nightfall. The castle operated on fear, though few would admit it aloud. Queen Margaret had ruled for 12 years, since her husband King William's death from a hunting accident, an accident that some whispered about only in the darkest corners of the taverns, where the Queen's spies were less likely to lurk. She had produced no heir, claiming always that she mourned too deeply to remarry, though she kept a string of young courtiers who competed for her attention and favour. In the servants' quarters that night, Beatrice's father Christopher had pulled her aside. He was the castle's stablemaster, a position of some respect among the servants, and he'd held it since before Queen Margaret's reign. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he gripped his daughter's shoulders. "You must be more careful, little bee," he said, using her childhood nickname. "I see how you watch, how you notice things. That's dangerous in this castle." "Father, I only do my work." "No, you do more than that. You think. I see it in your eyes, the same look your mother had." His voice caught on the mention of her mother, as it always did. "Promise me you'll keep your thoughts to yourself. Promise me you'll survive this place." Beatrice had promised, but she could see the fear in her father's eyes went deeper than normal parental concern. There was something specific he feared, something about her mother he'd never told her. Anna had died giving birth to Beatrice, or so she'd always been told. But sometimes, in the way people looked at her, in the way certain older servants fell silent when she approached, she wondered if there was more to the story. The next morning brought unseasonable warmth, and the Queen decided to hold court in the garden pavilion. Beatrice was among the servants assigned to attend, carrying wine and refreshments as nobles presented their petitions. She tried to remain invisible, as good servants did, but found herself listening to the proceedings with growing unease. A delegation from the northern villages had come to plead for relief from the new taxes. Their spokesman, a weather-beaten farmer named Harold Grayson, held his cap in gnarled hands as he spoke. "Your Majesty, the harvest was poor this year. The early frost destroyed half our grain. If we pay the new tax, we'll have no seed for spring planting. Our children are already going hungry." The Queen, resplendent in a gown of deep purple silk, didn't even look up from examining her rings. "Lord Chamberlain, what is the current deficit in the Treasury?" Lord Roderick Vance, a man whose wealth had mysteriously doubled since the Queen's ascension, cleared his throat. 40,000 gold crowns, Your Majesty, to maintain our current expenditures." Everyone knew those expenditures included the Queen's lavish parties, her collection of rare jewels, and the mysterious shipments that left the castle at night for destinations unknown. But no one dared say it. "Then the tax stands," the Queen said simply. "If your villagers cannot pay in gold, they can pay in labor. The iron mines always need workers." Harold Grayson's face crumbled. The iron mines were death sentences. Few survived more than a year in those dark tunnels. "Your Majesty, please. Some of us remember King William's time. He would never—" The Queen's head snapped up, her dark eyes flashing dangerously. "King William is dead. I rule now, and I command your silence on matters of the past." But Harold, perhaps driven by desperation or the memory of better times, continued. "The prince would be 17 now, had he lived, the same age as my own son. Sometimes I wonder what kind of king he would have." The crack of the Queen's hand against the marble table silenced him. "Guards, this man speaks treason. Take him." As the guards moved forward, Harold's wife, who had been waiting at the edge of the gathering, rushed forward. "Please, Your Majesty, he meant no harm. He's just worried about our children." The Queen stood, her height made more imposing by the raised platform of the pavilion. "Your husband should have thought of that before he questioned my rule. He'll serve in the mines he was so reluctant to send others to. As for you, woman, you'll find work in the castle laundries. Your children will be placed in the royal orphanage where they'll learn proper loyalty." The royal orphanage was another name for the child labour houses, where young ones were worked from dawn to dusk and taught that their parents were traitors. Beatrice watched in horror as the family was torn apart, their cries echoing across the garden as they were dragged in different directions. That evening, Beatrice couldn't eat. She sat in the servants' hall, pushing thin gruel around her bowl, when Agnes, the head housemaid, sat beside her. Agnes was ancient by castle standards, nearly 60, with silver hair always pulled back in a severe bun. She'd served since King William's father's time. "Don't let it burden you, child," Agnes said quietly. "We all learn to look away. It's how we survive." "How can you stand it?" Beatrice whispered. "Day after day, watching such cruelty." Agnes glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "I remember other times, better times, and I hope—" She stopped abruptly as another servant passed. When they were alone again, she leaned closer. "Your mother couldn't stand it either. That's why she left court. Chose to marry your father instead of what the Queen had planned for her." "The Queen knew my mother." Agnes's face went pale. "I've said too much. Forget it, child. Just be careful. You have your mother's sense of justice, and that's dangerous here." But Beatrice couldn't forget. That night, she cornered her father in the stables, where they could speak without fear of eavesdroppers. Horses, after all, couldn't report to the Queen. "Father, what was mother to the Queen?" Agnes said. Christopher's face darkened. "Agnes should keep her tongue. Some stories are better left buried, like mother was buried." "Father, I deserve to know." He sighed, sinking onto a hay bale. In the lamplight, she could see every line worry had carved into his face. "Your mother was Lady Anna Fairweather before she became my wife. She was the Queen's, Princess Margaret's then, closest friend and lady-in-waiting. They were inseparable from age 12 to 20. Beatrice sat beside him, stunned. Her mother had been nobility. "Why did she leave?" "She fell in love with me," Christopher said simply. "The princess had arranged a marriage for her to Duke Aldwyn of Ironmore, a man 40 years Anna's senior, cruel and cold, but wealthy beyond measure. The princess needed that alliance, but Anna chose love over duty. She married me in secret and left court life behind." "And the princess, the Queen, she was angry?" Christopher's jaw tightened. "Furious. She saw it as betrayal. Anna tried to explain, tried to maintain their friendship, but Margaret cut her off completely. And then, when you were born," he trailed off, lost in painful memory. "Father, how did mother really die?" He looked at her with haunted eyes. The midwife was delayed. She was supposed to arrive at dawn, but she didn't come until sunset. By then, your mother had lost too much blood. The midwife said she'd been detained at the castle, that the Queen had needed her for a minor ailment that couldn't wait. The implication hung between them like a blade. Beatrice felt cold despite the warm night. "You think the Queen deliberately—" "I know nothing for certain," Christopher said quickly, "and neither do you. Promise me, Beatrice. Promise you'll never speak of this, never seek revenge. I've already lost your mother. I cannot lose you, too." Beatrice promised, but the seed of knowledge had been planted, and it would grow in the darkness of her heart. The next morning brought chaos to the castle. Beatrice arrived for her duties to find the servants' quarters in uproar. Agnes lay in her bed, face grey, and breath laboured. The Queen's personal physician, Dr. Marcus Crane, stood over her, shaking his head. "Poison," he said quietly to the head butler. "Nightshade in her evening wine. She won't last the day." Beatrice rushed to Agnes's bedside. The older woman's eyes flickered open, focusing with difficulty on Beatrice's face. "The study," Agnes whispered, her voice barely audible. "Clean. The Queen's study today." Her hand gripped Beatrice's with surprising strength. "Behind the false panel. Your mother's." She coughed, blood speckling her lips. "Truth in the ashes." Agnes died before she could say more, leaving Beatrice with a mystery and a terrible certainty. Agnes had been murdered because she'd spoken about Anna. The Queen's reach extended even into the servants' private conversations. The head butler, perhaps seeing an opportunity to rid himself of a young servant who asked too many questions, immediately assigned Beatrice to clean the Queen's private study. Agnes was supposed to do it, but since she's indisposed... He said it with cruel casualness, as if Agnes weren't growing cold in her narrow bed. Beatrice's hands trembled as she gathered her cleaning supplies. The Queen's study was on the 3rd floor of the East Tower, accessed by a narrow spiral staircase that seemed to grow colder with each step. The door was massive oak, carved with the royal arms of Westmarch, a dragon coiled around a sword. She knocked softly, and when no answer came, entered with her key. The study was magnificent and terrible. Shelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound books, scrolls, and strange artifacts from across the known world. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface covered in maps, letters, and documents sealed with various noble crests. But what drew Beatrice's attention was the fireplace, where dying embers still glowed and partially burned papers littered the hearth. She began her work mechanically, dusting and arranging, but her mind was on Agnes's final words. A false panel behind something. She examined the walls carefully, running her fingers along the edges of bookcases and portraits. It was behind a painting of the Queen's coronation that she found it, a section of wall that sounded hollow when touched. The panel opened with gentle pressure, revealing a small space containing a leather portfolio. With trembling hands, Beatrice removed it and opened it on the Queen's desk. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in her mother's handwriting. The first was dated 15 years ago. "Dearest Margaret, your friendship means the world to me, but I cannot marry Duke Aldwyn. I know you've arranged it for the good of the kingdom, but I would rather die than share that monster's bed. Please understand, I've fallen in love with Christopher. He's everything Aldwyn is not. Kind, gentle, loving. I know he's beneath my station, but what is station compared to happiness? You're my dearest friend. Surely you want my happiness." The Queen's response was attached. "Anna, you are a fool. Love is a luxury we cannot afford. I am marrying William not for love, but for power, for position, for the chance to shape this kingdom. I thought you understood that we must sacrifice personal desires for greater goals. If you abandon me now, you are not the friend I thought you were. Reconsider, or we are finished." More letters followed, chronicling the dissolution of their friendship, Anna's secret marriage, her pregnancy. Then, near the bottom, a letter in the Queen's hand that had never been sent, dated the day before Anna's death. "You chose him over me. You chose common happiness over noble duty. Tomorrow you birth your common child, and I hope you understand then what you've thrown away. The midwife will be delayed. Let you bring your brat into the world alone as you left me. Perhaps if you survive, you'll understand the price of betrayal." Beatrice's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the portfolio. The Queen had killed her mother. Not with poison or blade, but with deliberate negligence, ensuring help wouldn't arrive in time. She was so absorbed in the horror of this revelation that she didn't hear the door open. "Well," Queen Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "It seems servants in this castle have forgotten the meaning of property." Beatrice spun around. The Queen stood in the doorway, resplendent in a gown of midnight blue, her dark hair crowned with a circlet of silver and rubies. Behind her stood Sir Garrett Blackwood, the captain of her personal guard, his hand already on his sword hilt. But Beatrice's fear had transformed into something else, a cold, burning rage that gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. She held up the letters. "You murdered my mother." The Queen's expression didn't change. "I did nothing. If your mother died, it was the will of the gods. Childbirth is dangerous for common women who breed above their station. You ordered the midwife to stay away. You have as good as confessed it in your own hand. Letters can be forged. Put them down and step away from my desk." But Beatrice noticed something else in the fireplace, the partially burned letter she'd seen earlier. She moved quickly, snatching it from the ashes before Sir Garrett could stop her. The wax seal was still visible, not the Queen's arms, but those of Ravenmoor. The few visible lines were damning. "The shipment of soldiers as agreed. When young Prince Thomas returns from the monastery, eliminate all witnesses to William's." The Queen's composed mask finally cracked. "Give that to me, now." "Prince Thomas is alive?" Beatrice's voice rang with sudden understanding. "You told the kingdom he died of fever, but he lives." "You know nothing." "I know enough," Beatrice interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "My cousin Matthew works at Greenvale Monastery. He's mentioned a boy there, raised as an orphan, who looks remarkably like the old king. Thomas would be 17 now, wouldn't he? The right age." Sir Garrett's sword was half drawn, but the Queen stayed him with a gesture. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with deliberate calm. "You're Anna's daughter," she said, studying Beatrice with new interest. "You have her defiant streak, also her naivety, apparently. What do you think will happen if you reveal any of this? Who would believe a servant over a queen?" "Lord Chancellor Philip might," Beatrice said. "He served King William faithfully and always questioned the prince's sudden death. Or perhaps Lord Frederick Ashford, who commands the kingdom's armies and has never fully trusted you. Or Lady Catherine Montrose, who controls the merchant guilds and has been concerned about the Treasury's mysterious expenditures." The Queen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you're clever, little girl. You think you can threaten me." "I think the truth has a way of spreading once it's spoken," Beatrice replied. "And I think you've ruled through fear for so long, you've forgotten that fear only works when people have something left to lose. You killed my mother. What else can you take from me?" "Your father still lives," the Queen said softly, dangerously. "The stable master Christopher, such a devoted father, visiting his daughter every evening. Accidents happen in stables. Horses spook. Men are trampled." The threat hung in the air like a poisoned blade. Beatrice felt her resolve waver for a moment, then strengthen. Her mother had chosen love over fear. She could choose truth over silence. "If anything happens to my father, I've arranged for letters to be sent to every noble house in the kingdom." Beatrice lied, with as much confidence as she could muster. "They contain copies of everything I've found here, including your confession about my mother and the evidence that Prince Thomas lives." Sir Garrett spoke for the first time. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should—" "Silence!" the Queen snapped. Then to Beatrice, "You're bluffing." "Am I? Can you afford to take that chance? Kill me, harm my father, and by week's end every lord in the kingdom will know their true king lives while a murderess sits on his throne." The Queen moved to her desk, her fingers drumming against the polished wood as she thought. "What do you want? Gold? A title? Marriage to some minor noble?" "I want justice." "Justice?" The Queen laughed bitterly. "There is no justice, you naive child. There is only power, and those too weak to seize it." "Then why do you fear the truth so much?" Beatrice countered. "If power is all that matters, why does the mere existence of Prince Thomas threaten you?" The Queen's composure cracked further. "That boy knows nothing of ruling. I've held this kingdom together for 12 years. The treasury is full of gold taxed from starving villagers and payments from Ravenmoor for selling our northern territories," Beatrice interrupted, holding up the burned letter. "Our borders are secure. Secured by foreign soldiers you're secretly allowing into our lands. Trade flourishes, built on the backs of those forced into slavery in the mines when they couldn't pay your impossible taxes." Each interruption struck the Queen like a physical blow. Sir Garrett watched the exchange with growing unease, his loyalty visibly wavering as each revelation came to light. "I've done what was necessary to keep this kingdom strong," the Queen said, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. You've done what was necessary to keep yourself in power, Beatrice corrected. There's a difference. At that moment, the door burst open. Lord Chancellor Philip entered, followed by several castle guards, not the Queen's personal guard, but regular soldiers. Behind them came Lady Catherine Montrose and Lord Frederick Ashford. Your Majesty, Lord Philip said, his aged face grave, we've received disturbing reports of a disturbance. The Queen straightened, trying to reclaim her authority. Lord Chancellor, this servant has broken into my private study and stolen personal correspondence. Correspondence that proves she murdered Lady Anna Fairweather and has hidden the true Prince of Westmarch in a monastery, Beatrice said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. Prince Thomas lives. The Queen has been lying to us all for 12 years. The effect was immediate. Lord Frederick's hand went to his sword. Lady Catherine gasped. Lord Philip's eyes narrowed with the satisfaction of suspicions finally confirmed. These are lies, the Queen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then you won't object to sending riders to Greenvale Monastery immediately, Lord Philip said smoothly. If the girl lies, she'll hang for treason. If she speaks truth, I am your Queen. Margaret's voice rose to a shriek. I command you to arrest this girl. But something had shifted in the room. The guards looked uncertain. Sir Garrett had fully sheathed his sword. The nobles exchanged meaningful glances. Your Majesty, Lady Catherine said carefully, if these accusations are false, surely you'd want them disproven publicly. Unless they're true, Lord Frederick finished. The Queen looked around the room, seeing the faces of those who had bowed to her for over a decade, now looking at her with suspicion and growing anger. You don't understand, she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. William was a brute. He would have destroyed this kingdom with his wars. I saved us all by murdering him, Lord Philip asked quietly. The admission hung in the air. The Queen hadn't meant to say it, but desperation had loosened her tongue. The silence that followed was deafening. Arrest her, Lord Philip commanded the guards. Queen Margaret of Westmarch, you are charged with regicide, murder, and treason against the Crown. You can't, the Queen screamed. I am the Crown. No, Beatrice said quietly, and everyone turned to her. The crown belongs to Prince Thomas. You were only ever a thief sitting on a stolen throne. As the guards moved forward, the Queen made one last desperate play. Sir Garrett, your oath! You swore to protect me! Sir Garrett stood still for a long moment, then slowly removed his captain's insignia and let them fall to the floor. I swore to protect the rightful ruler of Westmarch. I've just learned that was never you. The Queen's scream of rage echoed through the castle as the guards took her arms. As she was dragged past Beatrice, she hissed, You've doomed this kingdom, girl. That boy knows nothing of rule. Everything will fall apart. Better to rebuild on truth than stand on a foundation of lies, Beatrice replied. The castle erupted into chaos. Within hours, riders were dispatched to Greenvale Monastery. Lord Philip took control of the government, ordering the immediate release of all prisoners held on the Queen's personal orders, including Edmund Thornley and Harold Grayson. The treasury was seized, revealing extensive documentation of payments to Ravenmoor agents and lists of nobles who had been blackmailed into compliance. Beatrice found herself at the centre of a whirlwind. Lord Philip insisted she remain under protection, both for her safety and to ensure her testimony would be available when Prince Thomas arrived. She was moved from the servants' quarters to a guest room, the first time she'd slept in a real bed with clean sheets. That night her father came to her, tears streaming down his weathered face. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered, holding her tight. But child, I'm terrified for you. You've made powerful enemies today. I've also revealed powerful truths, Beatrice replied. Mother chose love over fear. I chose truth over silence. We're more alike than I knew. 3 days later, the riders returned with confirmation that shook the kingdom. Prince Thomas lived. He had been raised as Brother Thomas, told he was an orphan, trained in the monastery's ways of prayer and contemplation. The monks, freed from their oaths of silence by the Queen's arrest, revealed everything. The frightened 5-year-old prince delivered in the dead of night, the bags of gold that bought their silence, the threats that ensured it. But they also spoke of the young man Thomas had become, kind, intelligent, devoted to learning and helping others. He had worked in the monastery's infirmary, tending the sick. He had taught the younger orphans to read. He had shown natural leadership, though he believed himself no one special. Prince Thomas arrived at Westmarch Castle a week after the Queen's arrest, and the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Beatrice watched from a balcony as his procession entered the courtyard. At 17, he was striking, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, but with a gentleness in his bearing that William had never possessed. His hair was golden, his eyes the grey of storm clouds, and he wore simple monk's robes rather than royal finery. The nobility had assembled in the great hall to receive their lost prince. Beatrice stood with the servants, despite Lord Philip's invitation to join the nobles. She wanted to observe, not be observed. Thomas entered the hall with quiet dignity, his eyes taking in the grandeur with a mix of wonder and wariness. Lord Philip bowed deeply, followed by every noble present. "Your Highness," the Lord Chancellor said, "we rejoice in your return. Your throne awaits." Thomas's first words surprised everyone. "I want to meet the girl who risked everything to reveal the truth. Where is Beatrice?" The crowd parted, and suddenly all eyes were on her. Beatrice stepped forward, acutely aware of her simple dress among all the finery. She curtsied deeply. "Your Highness!" Thomas crossed to her, and to everyone's shock, took her hands and raised her to standing. "Don't bow to me. If anyone should bow, it should be me to you. You saved not just me, but this entire kingdom from living a lie. I sought justice for my mother, Your Highness. Your freedom was a fortunate consequence." Thomas studied her face intently. "Tell me about your mother. Tell me everything." So there, in front of the entire court, Beatrice told the story of Anna Fairweather, who chose love over position, who died because a jealous friend ensured help wouldn't come in time. Thomas listened without interrupting, and when she finished, there were tears on his face. "Then we're both orphans of Margaret's making," he said. "We've both lost parents to her ambition." He turned to address the court. "Let it be known that my first act as king will be to see justice done, not just for my father and Lady Anna, but for all who suffered under the usurper's rule." The trial of Margaret of House Blackwater began 2 weeks later. The great hall was transformed into a court of justice, with Thomas presiding, though Lord Philip and the High Council advised him. The hall was packed not just with nobles, but with common folk who had been granted entry. Merchants, farmers, craftsmen, all coming to see justice done. Margaret was brought in chains, though she walked with her head high. Prison had not diminished her pride, though it had stripped away some of her beauty. Her hair, no longer perfectly styled, showed streaks of grey. Her face, without cosmetics, revealed lines of stress and age. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Sir Garrett testified about secret meetings with Ravenmoor agents. Treasury officials revealed the systematic embezzlement. The monks from Greenvale told of the frightened prince delivered in the night. Dr. Marcus Crane, granted immunity for his testimony, admitted to providing the mercury that slowly poisoned King William, though he swore he hadn't known its purpose at the time. But the most damning testimony came from Lady Catherine Montrose, who produced a journal she had kept. "The Queen required me to document everything," she said, holding up the leather-bound book. "She was paranoid about betrayal, wanted records of every conversation, every transaction. What she didn't know was that I kept 2 copies, one edited for her approval and one true record." The journal detailed 12 years of crimes, the slow poisoning of King William, the bribes and blackmail, the secret dealings with Ravenmoor, and countless smaller cruelties. Servants dismissed for imagined slights, nobles ruined for questioning her, villages destroyed for failing to meet tax quotas. Through it all, Margaret remained silent until Thomas finally addressed her directly. "You were my stepmother. You raised me for 5 years before sending me away. Do you have anything to say?" Margaret looked at him with cold eyes. I saved this kingdom from your father's wars. I brought prosperity, built on suffering. Thomas interrupted gently. All prosperity is built on someone's suffering, Margaret replied. Your father understood that. He built his kingdom on the bodies of those he conquered. I simply chose different victims. And that's where you're wrong, Thomas said. True prosperity, true strength comes from lifting others up, not crushing them down. The monks taught me that. Margaret laughed bitterly. Monks! You'll try to rule with prayers and kindness, and this kingdom will devour you. These nobles bowing to you now, they served me faithfully for 12 years. They'll serve whoever holds power, and they'll turn on you the moment you show weakness. Then I'll have to show them a different kind of strength, Thomas replied calmly. You're a fool, boy. You know nothing of the world beyond monastery walls. I know more than you think, Thomas said. I've tended plague victims, comforted the dying, mediated disputes between desperate people. I've seen humanity at its worst and best. What I learned is that people rise or fall to the expectations placed upon them. You expected fear and obedience, so that's what you received. I intend to expect better. The judgment, when it came, surprised everyone. Thomas stood, his voice carrying through the hall. Margaret of House Blackwater, you are found guilty of regicide, murder, treason, and usurpation. The traditional penalty for such crimes is death. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many called for blood, wanting to see the Queen suffer as she had made others suffer. However, Thomas continued, I was raised by holy men who taught me that mercy can be more powerful than vengeance. You will not die. The hall erupted in shocked discussion. Margaret herself looked stunned. You will be stripped of all titles and possessions. You will be exiled to the convent of Silent Sisters in the northern wastes, where you will take a vow of perpetual silence. The woman who commanded others to be silent will never speak again. You will spend your remaining days in contemplation of your crimes, unable to give another order, unable to spread another lie, unable to cause another death with your words. The poetry of the sentence wasn't lost on anyone. Margaret's face went white. For someone who had ruled through words, who had shaped reality with her commands, eternal silence was worse than death. This is cruelty disguised as mercy, she spat. No, Thomas replied. This is justice. You silenced others, now you will be silenced. You isolated others, now you will be isolated. You showed no mercy, yet mercy is still shown to you. Perhaps in your silence, you'll find the conscience your words always drowned out. As Margaret was led away, she stopped beside Beatrice. The guards allowed her this moment. The two women who had brought down and raised up kingdoms with their words looked at each other. Your mother would be proud, Margaret said quietly, and for the first time there was something almost like regret in her voice. She had courage I could only dream of. The courage to choose happiness over power. I hated her for it, but perhaps I hated myself more for not being able to make the same choice. You could have chosen differently at any time, Beatrice replied. No, Margaret said sadly. After the first murder, all other choices disappeared. That's the trap of power gained through evil. It requires ever more evil to maintain. She looked at Thomas. Guard him well. He has something I never had, innocence. Once that's lost, it can never be recovered. Then she was gone, led away to her silent fate. The coronation of King Thomas took place 1 month later, on the first day of spring. The ceremony was unlike any Westmarch had seen. Thomas had insisted that the great hall be open to all, not just nobles. Farmers stood beside lords, merchants beside ladies, servants beside knights. The hierarchy that had defined the kingdom for generations was, at least for this day, dissolved. Beatrice stood in a place of honor, wearing a gown of deep blue silk that had been her mother's, retrieved from storage where it had been kept all these years. Thomas had insisted she stand with him as he took his oath, saying that without her courage he would still be Brother Thomas, ignorant of his birthright. Archbishop Benedict, who had remained carefully neutral during Margaret's reign, performed the ceremony. As he placed the crown upon Thomas's head, the young king spoke his coronation oath. "I swear before gods and men that I shall reign with justice, not fear. I swear that in my kingdom truth will be valued over flattery, courage over compliance, and mercy over vengeance. I swear that the lowest servant will have the same right to speak as the highest lord, and that never again will power command silence when truth needs to be spoken." The crowd erupted in celebration, but Thomas raised his hand for quiet. "My first decree as king is this. Let a monument be raised in the castle courtyard, inscribed with these words: 'When power commands silence, truth speaks anyway.' Let it remind all future generations that a kingdom built on lies will fall, but one built on truth will endure." He then did something unprecedented. He removed his crown and handed it to Beatrice. "Crown me again," he said. "Let the kingdom see that I owe my throne not to blood alone, but to the courage of one who dared speak truth to power." Beatrice's hands trembled as she took the crown. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. A servant girl crowning a king, the lowest elevating the highest. As she placed the crown on Thomas's head, she spoke loud enough for all to hear. "May you reign with wisdom, justice, and truth. May you remember that power serves the people, not the other way around. And may you never forget that sometimes the smallest voice speaks the greatest truths." The first year of Thomas's reign was marked by radical changes. He reformed the tax system, ensuring that the burden was distributed fairly. He opened the royal treasury to feed the hungry and rebuild villages destroyed by Margaret's policies. He established schools where children of all classes could learn together, breaking down the barriers that had separated noble from common. Not everyone was pleased. Some nobles, accustomed to their privileges, grumbled about a peasant king who didn't understand proper order. There was one attempt at rebellion, led by Duke Aldwin of Ironmore, the same man Anna had refused to marry all those years ago. But it failed when the Duke's own soldiers refused to fight against a king who had reduced their taxes and increased their wages. Beatrice served as Thomas's chief advisor, a position that caused considerable controversy. Many nobles were scandalized that a former servant girl held such influence. But Thomas stood firm, saying that Beatrice understood both the struggles of the common people and the machinations of the powerful, making her uniquely qualified to advise him. She implemented programs that would have been unthinkable under Margaret. Safe houses for women fleeing abusive marriages, guilds that protected workers from exploitation, courts where the poor could seek justice without payment. Each reform faced resistance, but Thomas's support and Beatrice's determination saw them through. One evening, 6 months into Thomas's reign, a messenger arrived from the northern wastes. The Mother Superior of the Convent of Silent Sisters reported that Margaret was gravely ill. She had maintained her vow of silence, not speaking a word since her arrival, but she had written a final letter to be delivered upon her death. Thomas and Beatrice read it together in the same study where everything had begun. "To King Thomas and Lady Beatrice, I write this in my last days, not seeking forgiveness. I know better than to expect that, but offering truth, the one thing I denied you both for so long. Thomas, your father was indeed a hard man, often cruel, but he loved you with a fierce devotion I never understood until now. In my silence, I've had time to think about love, about the choices we make. I chose power over love, fear over trust, control over connection. These choices carved me hollow, left me with a kingdom, but no soul. Beatrice, your mother was everything I could never allow myself to be. Brave enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to choose happiness, wise enough to know that love matters more than crowns. I killed her because I couldn't bear to see her have what I had convinced myself was impossible. In my silence, I've understood that I killed the one person who might have saved me from myself. I've watched from my window as the seasons change, as life continues without me, and I've realized that power is an illusion. We control nothing, really. The only choice that matters is whether we add to the world's store of kindness or cruelty. I chose cruelty, and reaped silence. You both chose kindness and reaped a kingdom. I do not ask for forgiveness. Some sins are too great. I ask only that you remember my story as a warning. Power without love becomes tyranny. Strength without mercy becomes brutality. And silence enforced becomes the loudest scream of all. Rule well. Love freely. And when power demands silence, speak anyway. Margaret. Thomas set down the letter, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Even at the end, she couldn't simply say she was sorry. But she came closer than I expected, Beatrice said. Perhaps the silence taught her something words never could. Margaret died 3 days later. Thomas ordered her buried with dignity, though without ceremony, in the convent cemetery. Her gravestone bore only her name and dates, no titles, no epithets, just another mortal returned to the earth. As the years passed, Thomas's reign became known as the Age of Voices. The kingdom flourished not through fear, but through participation. Town halls were established where citizens could speak directly to their representatives. The courts were reformed to ensure equal justice regardless of station. The arts thrived as censorship died. Beatrice never married, despite numerous suitors. When asked why, she would say that she had work to do, changes to make, wrongs to right. But those close to her suspected another reason, that having seen what the pursuit of power could do to love, she was cautious about mixing the two. Thomas did marry, 3 years into his reign, to a baker's daughter named Rose, who had caught his eye not with beauty or wit, but with kindness. She had been feeding street children with leftover bread, unaware the king was watching. Their wedding was a celebration of love rather than politics, and their children were raised to understand that royal blood meant responsibility, not superiority. Sir Garret served faithfully as Lord Commander of the reformed Royal Guard until his retirement, training a new generation of protectors who understood that their loyalty was to justice, not just to whoever wore the crown. He never forgot his failure to see through Margaret's lies earlier, and dedicated his remaining years to teaching others to question, to think, to speak up when something seemed wrong. Lord Philip lived long enough to see Thomas secure on his throne and the kingdom stabilized. On his deathbed, he told Beatrice, "In all my years of politics, I never saw anything as powerful as one servant girl speaking truth. Remember that when you doubt the worth of your work." 5 years after Thomas's coronation, Beatrice established the Order of Truth Speakers, an organization dedicated to protecting those who revealed corruption, abuse, or injustice. Its symbol was a simple flame, representing the light of truth that no darkness could extinguish. Members took an oath to speak truth regardless of personal cost, to protect others who did the same, and to ensure that never again would power be able to command absolute silence. The order grew rapidly, spreading beyond Westmarch to neighboring kingdoms. It became a check on royal power, a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that truth spoken bravely could topple tyrants. 10 years into Thomas's reign, on the anniversary of Margaret's arrest, Beatrice stood before a crowd in the castle courtyard for the dedication of the monument Thomas had ordered. It was a simple stone pillar, inscribed with the words that had become the kingdom's unofficial motto, "When power commands silence, truth speaks anyway." Thomas asked her to speak, and Beatrice looked out at the crowd. Nobles and commoners, rich and poor, all gathered together. 10 years ago, she began, I was a servant who found a burned letter and refused to be silent about it. I spoke not because I was brave, but because I was desperate. I spoke not because I was wise, but because truth has its own wisdom that compels us to give it voice. Queen Margaret commanded silence and ruled through fear. She believed that power meant the ability to determine who could speak and when. She was wrong. Power that depends on silence is not power at all. It's fear dressed in royal robes. My mother, Anna Fairweather, died because she chose love over position, authenticity over performance. She never got to speak her truth in life, but through her daughter, through all of us who refuse to be silent, her voice lives on. We've learned that truth may be delayed but cannot be destroyed, that justice may be postponed but cannot be prevented. We've learned that one voice, speaking truth at the right moment, can change everything. But we've also learned that it takes many voices, raised together, to keep that change alive. Today, we live in a kingdom where silence is a choice, not a command. Where truth is valued over comfort, where justice is available to all, not just to those who can afford it. But this freedom is fragile. Each generation must choose anew whether to speak or stay silent, whether to stand for truth or bow to power. So I charge you all, be truth speakers. When you see injustice, name it. When you witness cruelty, denounce it. When power commands silence, speak anyway. Not because it's easy, it never is. Not because it's safe, it rarely is. But because a kingdom where truth can be spoken is the only kingdom worth living in. The crowd erupted in applause, and Thomas embraced her. "You've given me a kingdom," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "No," Beatrice replied. "I've given the kingdom back to its people. You've just been wise enough to let them keep it." That night, Beatrice walked alone through the castle gardens, the same paths where her mother and Margaret had once walked as friends, before jealousy and circumstance poisoned everything. She thought about the strange turns of fate, how Margaret's cruelty had ultimately led to her downfall, how Anna's death had given birth to the courage that would save a kingdom. At a small shrine Thomas had built in Anna's memory, Beatrice found her father. Christopher was older now, his hair completely grey, but he stood straighter than he had during Margaret's reign. The fear that had bent him for so long had finally lifted. "She would be so proud," he said, as Beatrice joined him. "I hope so," Beatrice replied. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she had lived. Would Margaret have been different? Would Thomas have been raised as a prince? Would any of this have been necessary?" Christopher put his arm around his daughter. "The monks Thomas lived with would say that everything happens for a purpose. I don't know if that's true. But I know that your mother's death, terrible as it was, gave birth to something Margaret never expected. A daughter with nothing to lose and everything to say. And that daughter changed everything." They stood in comfortable silence, remembering a woman whose choice to love had seemed like weakness to a queen, but had proven to be the strongest force of all. As the years passed, the story of the servant who spoke when commanded to be silent became legend. It was told in taverns and palaces, in schools and temples. Parents told it to children as a bedtime story. Ministers used it in sermons. Rebels in other kingdoms adopted it as inspiration. But in Westmarch, it was more than a story. It was a living reminder that power without accountability becomes tyranny, that truth spoken bravely can topple thrones, and that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth. Thomas ruled for 43 years, known to history as Thomas the Just. He never forgot that he owed his throne to a servant girl's courage. Every year, on the anniversary of Margaret's arrest, he would remove his crown and place it before the monument in the courtyard, reminding everyone that the crown served truth, not the other way around. Beatrice lived to see Thomas's children grown and crowned in their turn, each taking an oath to serve truth before power. She established schools, reformed laws, and spent her final years writing a history of the realm, not the history of kings and queens, but of ordinary people who had chosen to speak when silence would have been safer. She died at 73, peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral was attended by thousands, not because she had been powerful, but because she had shown that power was nothing compared to truth spoken bravely. She was buried beside her mother, their gravestones bearing a simple inscription: "They chose truth." In the decades and centuries that followed, Westmarch would face new challenges, new tyrants would rise, new lies would be told. But always, someone would remember the servant girl who spoke anyway and find their own courage to do the same. The monument in the courtyard still stands, weathered by time but unbroken, its inscription still clear: "When power commands silence, truth speaks anyway." And in the castle where a queen once commanded silence, voices rise freely, speaking truth to power, ensuring that never again will fear rule where courage should reign. But the most lasting memorial to that moment when Beatrice refused to be silent isn't made of stone. It lives in every person who chooses to speak up rather than stay safe, who values truth over comfort, who remembers that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, not wisdom. For in the end, the battle between those who would command silence and those who insist on speaking is eternal. It plays out in every generation, in every kingdom, in every heart that must choose between the safety of silence and the danger of truth. And in Westmarch, thanks to a servant girl who spoke when commanded to be silent, that battle has already been won. Not forever, such victories never are, but for now, for today, for as long as people remember that truth spoken bravely is the most powerful force in any kingdom, the guards who once enforced silence now protect free speech. The halls that once echoed with fear now ring with debate. The throne that once commanded obedience now invites participation. And somewhere in the northern wastes, in a small convent cemetery, lies a queen who learned too late that power built on silence is no power at all. This is the legacy of two women, one who chose love and died for it, and one who chose truth and lived to see it transform a kingdom. Anna and Beatrice, mother and daughter, separated by death but united in courage, proving forever that when power commands silence, truth will always find a voice. And so the story continues, not ended, but always beginning. Each time someone chooses to speak rather than submit, to risk rather than retreat, to remember that silence may seem golden to those who command it, but truth spoken bravely is the real treasure of any realm. In the great library of Westmarch, established by Thomas and expanded by his successors, there is a special room where the documents from Margaret's trial are preserved. The burned letter that started it all, the journal that revealed the truth, the letters between Anna and Margaret that showed how friendship became hatred. Students come from across the known world to study them, to understand how power corrupts and how truth liberates. But the most popular display is the simplest, a servant's cleaning rag, stained and worn, that Beatrice had been carrying when she found the letter. It sits in a place of honor, a reminder that heroes don't always carry swords or wear crowns. Sometimes they carry cleaning supplies and speak truth when everyone else is silent. The rag has become a symbol, reproduced on banners and coins, worn as badges by the order of truth speakers. Foreign diplomats are sometimes puzzled by its prominence, expecting to see swords or crowns or dragons. But citizens of Westmarch understand it represents the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they refuse to be silenced. Years later, when Beatrice was very old, a young servant girl approached her with a question that had been bothering her. "Lady Beatrice," she said, "weren't you afraid when you stood before the Queen and spoke, knowing she could have you killed?" Beatrice smiled, remembering that moment, the fear that had turned to rage, the rage that had become courage. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I was more afraid of living in a world where truth couldn't be spoken. Fear of death lasts a moment. Fear of living a lie lasts a lifetime." "But how did you know it would work? How did you know others would listen?" "I didn't," Beatrice said simply. "I only knew that silence hadn't worked. Every day of Margaret's reign, people stayed silent, and every day things got worse. I thought, perhaps if one person speaks, others will remember they have voices too. And I was right, not because I was special, but because the desire for truth lives in every heart. It just needs permission to speak." The young servant nodded thoughtfully. "So anyone could do what you did?" "Anyone could do more than what I did," Beatrice corrected. "I spoke truth when I had nothing left to lose. The real heroes are those who speak truth when they have everything to lose. Watch for them. Support them. Be one of them if you can." The girl left with much to think about, and Beatrice returned to her work, the never-ending work of ensuring that the freedom to speak, so hard won, would be preserved for future generations. In her final letter, written the night before she died and addressed to the kingdom, Beatrice wrote, "My fellow citizens, I leave you not with commands or wisdom, but with a simple request. Remember that your voice matters. It matters when you speak against small injustices, not just great ones. It matters when you defend truth in everyday conversations, not just in throne rooms. It matters when you choose courage in tiny moments, not just dramatic ones. I was called a hero for speaking truth to a queen, but the real heroism belongs to all of you who speak truth every day, to your neighbors, your employers, your families, yourselves. Every time you refuse to let a lie pass unchallenged, every time you name an injustice, however small, every time you choose truth over comfort, you honor not just my mother's memory or my actions, but the fundamental principle that makes us human, the capacity to say no to power when power is wrong. Guard your freedom to speak. Use it wisely, but use it. Silence may sometimes be prudent, but it should never be commanded. And when someone tries to command it, remember a servant girl who spoke anyway and changed a kingdom. May you all find your voices. May you all speak your truths. And may you never forget that sometimes the most important words ever spoken are the ones power doesn't want to hear. With hope for the future and gratitude for the past, Beatrice." The letter was read aloud in every square in the kingdom, and copies were sent to every corner of the known world. It became a rallying cry for the oppressed, a warning to tyrants, and a reminder to everyone that truth spoken bravely can change the world. And in the castle of Westmarch, in the room where a queen once commanded silence, children now learn to read and write, their voices rising in unison as they recite the words that have become more than a motto. They've become a promise. When power commands silence, truth speaks anyway. The promise lives on, passed from generation to generation, a eternal flame that no darkness can extinguish. And somewhere, in every age, in every kingdom, there is always someone who remembers the servant who spoke, the queen who fell silent, and the truth that set a kingdom free.